It's time for the semi-finals of the European Championships. France take on Spain, and tomorrow England take on the Netherlands. And after the Euros is completed in its entirety, maybe, just maybe, some marquee signings may be on their way to Arsenal. We've got updates on other transfer targets and outgoings too in today's Arsenal Transfer Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of the Arsenal Transfer Show, live from the TGT Mobile here down in the New Forest this week. Of course, for those not having joined us over the last few days, I'm currently on holiday and still producing this daily content for you. I hope you're doing good. I hope you're doing well. If you could be ever so kind and ever so bold as to leave a like on the video, that would just help us on our way to 1K every single day. I would be really appreciative of it. Good morning to those joining us in the chat box. Hope you're doing good and well too. Matt G, Blackshine, Pika Who, we've got Clincy and Martin, we've got Amira, Stephen, Stevie, Jose, Glenn, P Sharp, we've got Aaron and Annihilation. Annihilation? I don't know what that means. Annihilation? Adagoke, Mark, we've got Temi, Simple Unity, James, Humphrey, we've got Angela, we've got Errol, Vidal, and plenty more of you guys and girls too. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. It's very much appreciated. A couple of things before we go into today's show. Yesterday, or rather this morning, actually, I think the email came in yesterday, but no, it was this morning at 1:23 a.m. I got an email telling us that you may have remember on the show previously, I spoke about this channel getting into the top 200 of British sports podcasts. It's not just British football podcasts, but sport in general, which was an amazing achievement for all of us to have done together. Well, this morning I got an email saying we're in the top 150 of British sports podcasts, which is now absolutely amazing. Thank you to all of those that continue to join in, continue to listen to us. It is incredibly humbling and incredibly exciting to see this little old podcast being done from a car in the middle of a field do so well. And thank you also to Roch BGS, who I notice your very kind words and your 5-star review on iTunes as well. If you would like to help us out on the channel even more than just tuning in and dropping a like, if you want to hop over to iTunes and write a very kind 5-star review, or if you're listening on Spotify and you want to leave a little 5-star rating, those things really help us push up the charts. So massive thank you for helping us reach there. This is a slightly longer introduction than I normally would like to do on the channel. And the reason for that is I wanted to give a particular shout out to our good friend Kingsley Paul in yesterday's comment section, who says, why not just go straight to the issues and the news rather than wasting our data with useless talk about where you are unnecessarily? Sorry. Well, Paul, I hope that you've enjoyed this extra long intro and that this hasn't used up too much of your data. But I would like to say that we do go to the effort after the show is completed to actually putting in chapters so that you can click on the parts that you would like to watch and the parts that you don't necessarily want to watch. So if you just want to watch the news, just go to the little thing where there's a few words of text next to the timer, and you can actually go and click on the parts of the video that you would like to go and watch. So we actually do put in the effort so you don't have to listen to me rambling on like a human being at the start of episodes. So feel free to use those chapters, and hopefully that will help you to avoid wasting any more of your data in the future. Let's jump into today's stories, though, before Paul has something of an aneurysm. We're going to start with Mika Biereth, who, of course, has now officially left Arsenal to join Sturm Graz in a £4 million deal. Mika Biereth, of course, who joined Arsenal only 3 years ago in 2021, spent some time with the under-18s, then went on loan to RKC Waalwijk in the Netherlands, where he experienced a pretty torrid season with some significant injuries. 2 more loans last season to Motherwell, and then, of course, to Sturm Graz saw him rise in popularity. That £4 million deal with a significant sell-on clause in that deal is, according to Edu, some good business. He says, we are so proud of the progress Mika has made since joining us. This new opportunity with Sturm Graz is great for Mika, and it's a good example of what a strong loan development plan produces. Mika will be playing Champions League football when the season starts again, which he deserves due to his mentality and performances in recent seasons. So there you go for the all those that were very much a little bit skeptical, perhaps, about what Arsenal were doing. It seems that Edu is very pleased with the loan development plan that they've got in place for their players. I said before that, you know, this is a record deal for Sturm Graz, and the interest really was solely from the Austrian side. There was mentions of championship clubs that never really turned into anything more than that. And so, despite a 23-year-old transfer record being broken by Sturm Graz, there was still some frustration about this deal. Of course, the sell-on clause hopefully will get Arsenal some more money in the future. But I think maybe there was some element of overhyping this situation. I think that we can probably come to an agreement on that now. And if we can't, fair enough. But I think in the end, I think a lot of us are guilty of maybe overhyping Mika Biereth somewhat. Bologna are now said to be interested in signing Mats Hummels, of course, the German international who left Borussia Dortmund after their Champions League final disappointment. Well, they are looking, of course, for a replacement for Riccardo Calafiori, who is currently continuing those negotiations to join Arsenal. This is, of course, now the second half of that 24 to 48 hours that a number of Italian outlets claimed would be the defining section, if you like, of this transfer for Riccardo Calafiori to join Arsenal. So you'd hope that we'd get a bit of a breakthrough in the coming days. From our side of things in England, you may have seen me tweet yesterday rather satirically that nothing much has changed from our side of things of what we're being told and what we're being briefed at this stage. The interest is significant. Arsenal want to do a deal. The talks are ongoing. But let's wait and see what happens with that. But Bologna very much looking to try and sort out a replacement now. Arsenal are also still said to have an interest in Marc Guehi, the Crystal Palace defender and England international, who has definitely stood out at the European Championships this summer. He's definitely still going to be in with something of a fight to start England's game against the Netherlands tomorrow evening. Of course, Ezri Konsa came in because he was suspended for the semi-finals, and Konsa also had a very good game, I thought, on the day. So there's going to be a bit of a battle to see who is going to be starting. But what I would say is that Guehi certainly would represent a significant signing for a centre half, and I think would certainly, if we were to move for Guehi, it would solidify the idea that Calafiori would be coming in as a left back rather than the left-sided defender, considering that Guehi can also play left centre-back. He is right-footed, but can play right centre-back as well. If Arsenal are moving on Kivior, if Zinchenko was to leave and we were to replace them with Calafiori and Guehi, that would be a significant upgrade, I think, in two areas, and would really help us moving forwards and would represent two good pieces of business for Arsenal. So that's all definitely positive. Meanwhile, we move to Wolves and Dan Bentley. We spoke about this story yesterday, of course, with Arsenal very interested in signing the Wolves backup goalkeeper. The situation is, however, at this moment in time, that Wolves are not keen on selling the goalkeeper, according to a number of outlets. And now, of course, Alan Nixon, who broke this story initially, is that Wolves are, again, not keen to let him leave because he's a good presence in the dressing room. They really like him. Arsenal may therefore need the player to do a little bit of a push and to kind of really fight to potentially leave Wolves to join Arsenal. The price tag is being talked about at £1 million. It's not an expensive deal, supposedly, for this to happen. Arsenal may need to offer Bentley quite a good pay rise in order to kind of push through the deal. But this is not a deal with him having just a year left on his contract. This is not a deal that is expected to put Arsenal back a lot of money. And for a goalkeeper that's already, of course, played Premier League minutes, to be able to get him in for a very small fee as a third-choice keeper, you don't want to see Arsenal spending loads of money on this deal. And with Karl Hein leaving the club, of course, on loan, we need to make sure that we've got that experience. And I think it's really important to have that type of figure in the dressing room as well. That's really, really important. I'm hoping that we can get a deal for Bentley done. It would represent some really good depth and really good, shrewd transfer business in that area of the field, especially because we're a bit unsure about what's going on with Ramsdale. It's good if he stays, it's good if he goes, but hopefully Arsenal can indeed get this deal over the line and Bentley is convinced to join, and Wolves can be convinced, of course, to sell. But our key headline story of the day, according to Ed Aarons of The Guardian, Arsenal are among clubs that are still said to be keen on Eze and signing the England international, of course, again, another player who has convinced at the European Championships. He's been very good, of course, for Crystal Palace. I think this is very much reliant upon, in fact, it's more than I think. I know this is more reliant upon players leaving, in particular, Emile Smith-Rowe. Emile Smith-Rowe would, of course, need to move on. And we know that there is genuine interest from Fulham in Smith Rowe. He is one of their primary and priority targets, that they are expected to formalise that interest in Smith Rowe into something of a bid. There is news and certainly an understanding that that is going to happen, and that we should see this happen in the coming weeks, that interest in Smith Rowe will be formalised. And it'll be intriguing to see how much Fulham come in initially for Smith Rowe, if they are willing to come up to that 30 million plus price tag that I think we've spoken about on the channel before. If Arsenal get even close to 40 million pounds, that'd be amazing to see a deal done. But I think Smith Rowe's priority is playing as many minutes as he can. There has been a suggestion that his priority still is to remain at Arsenal, but if those minutes are not forthcoming, he will move on. If you were to ask me who I would rather have in the squad right now, of course it would be Eze. I do think Eze has got more of a guarantee, of course, not only to stay fit, but of a higher potential level. And of course, with his Premier League consistency and minutes for Crystal Palace, and of course now as an England full international, I don't think there's much debate about who currently is the better option for Arsenal to have. His also his ability to play in multiple positions on the left, through the middle, and even on the right. I think that versatility is something that Arteta would really enjoy from Eze. And he's certainly a very good player to have as an option. And I think if Ødegaard, of course, was to get injured somewhat, and we weren't to have Ødegaard for a certain period, Eze coming into that role, I would have, much more confidence about that than, say, I would Emile Smith Rowe going into that position, as we have seen. So there you go. That's all of today's story. So we're going to jump to part 2 and your questions right after this. Okay, jumping into the chat box, tackling some of your thoughts, your theories, your questions, and your queries in this second part of the show. Very curious to get your thoughts on some of the stories that we have, of course, talked about today. Ben here saying Eze is literally Smith Rowe with more minutes. I don't think that's fair at all, to be honest. I think that the thing about Eze we've seen also is a much greater consistency in terms of goal contributions over the course of a number of seasons with Crystal Palace. When Smith Rowe was playing more regularly with Arsenal, yes, he was contributing goals and assists, but we've seen a really good consistent level of goal contributions throughout seasons. 11 Premier League goals last year was an excellent return. That's up there with what Ødegaard is producing in terms of goals for a far worse side than Arsenal with respect to Palace, in terms of the level that they're competing at. I think that is slightly insulting. No, not insulting, but slightly underwhelming of a description of what Eze ultimately is. And to be honest, even if it was accurate, would you rather not have a player that's more available than one, of course, that is the majority of the time more injured? This isn't a bash of Smith Rowe. Smith Rowe is a very talented player. A very, very talented player. But even as MD points out, even when he is fit, he's not being given the minutes. Like, Arteta's not necessarily giving him that time. And whether that's because he doesn't trust him anymore, he just doesn't feel that he's got the right moments to bring him in, or his system doesn't. I personally think that Smith Rowe does not fit into Arsenal's current structure and system. I think that before, when we had Aubameyang up top, him playing on the left, Saka on the right, the system worked a lot more to fit what we had come to expect. We had, two with Granit Xhaka on the left-hand side and Partey, and then Ødegaard. You had a more natural 4-2-3-1 with one of those two in the double pivot in Xhaka moving forwards. And to be fair, during the time that Smith Rowe spent on the left-hand side, if you have a look at the heat maps between Xhaka during the season where he had such a great success in the 22-23 season, and if you look at the heat map of Smith Rowe when he broke into the left-hand side in the 21-22 season, that heat map is very similar to what Xhaka's was. And when Smith Rowe came out of the team, Xhaka's role changed, and that role, of course, that Declan Rice has started to take on a lot more, where he's progressing forwards and attacking the box a lot more. We haven't really got a use for a left-sided playmaker. The left side is far more about a traditional winger these days. And I think that Eze, even though certainly is stylistically more similar, say, to Smith Rowe than he is to Martinelli. I think he's certainly got a lot more of the traits of a natural winger than what Smith Rowe does. And that's why I think Eze would be a good fit. And not only that, but of course, his ability to play more so as a natural 10 and be a better understudy or competitive option. I don't think it's even understudy. It's probably a bit insulting towards Eze. I think Eze would be a much more competitive option, a rotational figure for Ødegaard as well than Smith Rowe is at the moment. I think that's important to point out. Sophian says, congrats on the top 150, Tom. You deserve it. I'm a big fan of Havertz and hope he gets 20 plus next season, but I am worried about his finishing. Did you see this during the Euros? What's your thoughts? The thing about Havertz is that, of course, we've spoken before, if he was Arsenal's penalty taker and had been given the penalties, of course, that Saka had, we were talking about a player that would be sitting second in the golden boot race this season. That's the level of goal scoring that Havertz is at right now. He does produce plenty of goals. It was his first season for Arsenal, and he started and spent most of the season playing in midfield. 2/3 of that season was spent playing in midfield. Is he an amazing finisher? Is he the most clinical player in the world? Of course not. But is he comparatively, is he comparable in terms of finishing to other centre forwards? Absolutely, yes. If you look at his numbers compared to a player like Victor Osimhen, who of course I know a lot of Arsenal fans would love to see Arsenal go for, his finishing compared to Osimhen is very similar. The number of goals that Osimhen, of course, scores compared to Havertz might be more frequent in terms of the minutes that he's played, especially during the 22-23 season. But still, if you were looking at the finishing numbers, the amount of shots that they had, the amount of opportunities, the XG and the goals per 90 compared to their XG per 90, Havertz compares really, really well with Osimhen in terms of goal scoring. So I don't think that the finishing is necessarily a concern for me with Havertz, nor do I think that there is a striker out there that I think guarantees us far, far, far more goals than what Havertz is currently providing us. Plus, also, what you've got to understand is not only is the finishing numbers comparable to that of Osimhen, but his shot creation, his collaboration is far higher than that of an Osimhen. So he actually produces plenty. And this is obviously a guy that became our established centre-forward in a team that scored more Premier League goals than the Invincibles. So it's really important to point those points out when discussing Havertz as Arsenal's centre forward. Paul says, I'm with you, Tom, on Eze. I'm going to listen to the rest of the show until I get called in for anesthesia for surgery. Anastasia. It's a brilliant typo, that, Paul. But absolutely best of luck, mate, with the surgery, and I hope everything goes well. Arushnaf says, giving up on Smith Rowe is going to be the worst decision by Arsenal. Whoever up there said Eze is basically Smith Rowe with minutes is spot on. Give him Martinelli's treatment, unleash him now, then see. I think that Smith Rowe has been given opportunities. You know, it's not like he's been injured for loads of last season. He's been given minutes, and I have not necessarily looked at the time that he's spent on the field and thought, yeah, we're going to get the Smith Rowe back that we saw in 21-22 or in the latter stages of 2021. So, I think I've kind of said my piece on it. I just don't think that he's a very likable guy. And I think maybe Ben's putting this out here, that he is, for many, a lot of people's favourite player. Smith Rowe is a very likable character. He's very shy. Having spoken to him myself and speaking to him personally after the game against Brentford in the League Cup where he started, there was a shyness about him, you know, and I think that's something that maybe came through in the Amazon documentary as well. Do you remember that moment where he was being interviewed by not interviewed, but he was being coached, and it was like an individual thing with Albert Stuvenberg. You may remember the part during the All or Nothing, and he was asked to speak louder. He lacks that confidence, perhaps, as individually. And that's come across in my interactions with him as well. But when he's been on the pitch, when he's been on form, that confidence shines through. He is very much a confidence player, I think, and he does need more consistent minutes. And maybe that needs to happen by leaving Arsenal and going to a Fulham. But I'd absolutely wish him all the best and hope he succeeds, because he's a lovely bloke and a brilliantly talented player. But it's just not working out for Smith Rowe at Arsenal at the moment, and that's the issue that we've got. Laura's jumping into the chat. Nice to see you. Laura says there is no role for Smith Rowe in this system anymore, and you could see that in his cameos this year. And this is the point, and Martin's agreeing here. It's the system, it's the structure. I don't think we have a place for his skill set, his position, and Eze offers greater versatility and a greater level of goal scoring and goal contributions than Smith Rowe does at a lower level with Palace, that I think perhaps is what would interest Arsenal so significantly. Abel says, "Hey Tom, do you believe that Arteta and Edu are going to get us a lethal striker this summer? Are they working on it? If it's a yes, who would it be? Just tell us, please." My money, if I was betting on it, would be no. I don't think Arsenal will go out and get a lethal striker this summer, just because I don't necessarily see a lethal striker out there that's available for Arsenal to go and sign. I'd love us to go and get Alexander Isak. Believe me, I would. But I just don't think it's realistic, and I don't think Arsenal see it as a feasible signing for them, because Newcastle have absolutely no interest in selling. And they, of course, did sell players before the PSR deadline. They may still even have some restrictions on them, maybe, but they have no interest in letting Isak leave. And he's actually quite keen to stay and sign a new deal. And he is the only player that I look at and think he's an absolutely guaranteed changeable player. Mugarzad says Gyökeres. Gyökeres is the other option, but of course the thing about Gyökeres is that there is a greater level of risk with that signing. He's still costing you £86 million, €100 million release clause, and he's of course had an excellent season, scoring loads of goals. But there is a far greater level of risk with that deal. I am keen to see what Gyökeres could do in an Arsenal shirt. But do I think that a striker this summer is more important than a wide player? No, I don't. I think that our biggest deal that we need to do is a centre mid. I think we absolutely need to go out and bring in a very good central midfielder. My next big priority is a wide player, definitely a right-sided right player, to give in that competition to Saka and add greater depth there. My third biggest is a defender, and we hopefully will be fulfilling that with Calafiori. And my fourth biggest priority is then centre forward. And the reason why it's my priority is because we've got Havertz, who did very well. We've got Trossard, and we've got Gabriel Jesus. And I think Gabriel Jesus is quickly forgotten about. He is an excellent, excellent player. And I think that Jesus, if he's able to find some consistency in goal scoring, has everything else at his fingertips. And it is just that goal scoring and, of course, the injuries that go alongside that leave us somewhat frustrated and underwhelmed. But you look at his FBref profile, for instance, the numbers for Jesus on his contributions in passing, in shot creation, in collaboration, in dribbling, in take-ons, in passing, in defending, everything to do with his position are off the charts. They're in the top percentiles of all of these areas. It's just his goal scoring that he needs to find the difference. And still at what, 27, 28? Just having a quick check on his age. Let's have a quick look. 27 years of age. And he won't be 28 until April of next year. This is a guy in his prime. It would be mad to sell Gabriel Jesus. Absolutely mad to sell Gabriel Jesus, because he is a very key part of the depth of this squad and of the attacking options that we've got. And that is why the striker position for me is nowhere near, not nowhere near, but it's just not in the top three priorities for me during this window, because we have plenty of goals. As I said, we scored more goals last season in the Premier League than ever before. Last season, our win percentage was higher across all competitions than any Arsenal side ever recorded. And that's the level that we are performing at right now. Now, we need to turn that record into trophies. We need to turn that record into silverware. But at the end of the day, what we have got is a very good team. And that makes signing players all that much more difficult. But priorities for me are centre midfielder, right-sided right forward, defender in Calafiori, which I think fulfills that. And, of course, then a centre forwards. And, of course, there's going to be a goalkeeper in there as well that also needs to be considered. There's an argument as well, should Smith Rowe leave, then the attacking midfield becomes something of a priority more so as well. And Eze, of course, would be an excellent addition, but it's going to cost you 60 million quid. Do Arsenal have the financial freedom to bring in a right winger, a centre-back in Calafiori that could cost us 40 million pounds or upwards of that? Do we have the money to also then bring in a centre mid that needs to be a top centre midfielder and a priority position for me as well? All of those things have combined to leave us a lot to do in this window. But for me, this window is the last window where we need to be thinking about a mass overhaul of players. This has to be the final window for me for quite some time where you see a major influx and outflux. Is the opposite of influx outflux? Probably not. But you know what I mean. A major incoming and a major outgoing. This is the last summer for a while. We need to see this. 2025 and 2026 needs to be the 1, 2, max 3 significant additions to the squad. We might make some depth additions. We might make some youngster signings. We might do some things that we've seen like Chelsea doing of late. But this summer needs to be the big overhaul in its finale. Get out a lot of the deadwood, bring in some important quality and depth, and that good. Laura reckons it's efflux. I need to check this. Opposite of influx. It is efflux. Fair play. Effluence, efflux, or outflow. So yeah, you learn something new every day. The opposite of influx is efflux. So learn a new word. Definitely going to be using that more often. Can't wait. Dirk says, do you think we need more of a well-rounded 8, for example, a De Jong type, or an Eze who is more of a 10? I guess it always comes back to Declan Rice, this question. It always comes back to where you see Declan Rice being in the future. Now, for me, I really like him as an 8, and I like what he's doing, but I don't know what it is. I just think that Rice can become our Rodri. I think that Rice can become the best number 6 in the league, if not potentially being up there as that player already. And I would like Arsenal to go out and sign a world-class box-to-box 8 that can play that role beautifully, that can contribute goals and assists, but can also reinforce us defensively. The problem is I don't necessarily see that player out there at the moment, and that is the biggest problem with this summer, is that despite it being, for me, needing to be our last big our biggest influx and efflux of players, the market is not supporting that. The market is not supporting that ability. And so that is the problem that we have. And, Bruno Guimaraes would have been a great option, but again, he's hugely expensive, probably more expensive than he's worth. João Neves is an excellent young option for that role, but again, he's not worth 120 million euros, which is his release clause. I don't want another Enzo Fernandez situation and regret it because he's still very young. But if he was going for back in the day, you'd get a João Neves for £40 million. And you wouldn't blink twice at that. The problem is now is that Benfica know that a club like Chelsea will come along and pay the stupid release clause of Enzo Fernandez. And now they're in a position where they're like, well, why on earth would we ever accept anything below 120 million euro release clause? Because a club like Chelsea is stupid enough to pay that level of fee for a player. So João Neves is probably not possible, which is a shame because he's an excellent talent and I would have loved him at Arsenal. One of the other options I talk about a lot is João Gomez. I really like João Gomez at Wolves. He's already a full Brazil international. He looks like the player. Maybe you get him now before he turns into that next great centre mid, that next Bruno Guimaraes. I think he's definitely somebody I'd look at. If you want a cheaper option, then Yusuf Fofana can tie you over for a few years. But the thing about Yusuf Fofana is I'm not sure if he can necessarily reach that, excellent world-class level, but certainly provides plenty of talent at the moment. There's already a full France international, of course, as well. So that's the thing. That is the thing. And Ben says here, isn't it worrying that none of our links move the needle? Say we get these players, we're still not a favourite for the league or the Champions League. What's the point in wasting money? The problem that I've got with this question, Ben, and I'll give it the respect that I think the question deserves, is that saying that I'll focus on the last part of your question. I'll go in reverse. I'll take this from back to front. We're still not a favourite for the league or the Champions League. The favourite for the league is Manchester City. The favourite for the Champions League is Real Madrid. And the second favourite for the Champions League is again, Manchester City. Now, I don't think there is anything Arsenal could do in this particular window to make them a favourite in the league. And I don't think there is anything Arsenal could do to make them the favourite in the Champions League. If your expectation for a transfer window is for Arsenal to become the favourite for the league or the favourite for the Champions League, it's not possible, mate. It's just not. There are no signings that Arsenal can realistically do with the budget and the financial fair play restrictions that exist that can take Arsenal above Manchester City as favourites for the Premier League and above Real Madrid, who have just signed Mbappe and are bringing in Endrick to become favourites for the Champions League. There is nothing we can do. So if that's your expectation, you are always going to be disappointed. Now, do you think that Arsenal are now a favourite, as in one of the favourites for the Champions League, one of the favourites for the Premier League, without question. And that's before we do any business this window, by the way. That's what our business has done. That's what Arteta's coaching has done. That's what the whole squad model and structure and strategy has done, is we are now one of the favourites for these competitions. We're not the favourite for these competitions, but we are already one of the favourites. We are the second favourite for the league next season on odds. We'll be one in the top 5 of clubs, perhaps top 3 for the Champions League next season. I'd be surprised if we weren't 3rd or 4th in terms of the bookies' favourites for the Champions League next season. That is what we've done. And that is before we have done anything this summer, by the way. We brought in Raya on a permanent deal. Calafiori does move the needle. And the reason why Calafiori moves the needle is because as a left-sided centre-back and a left-back, we don't have an established left-back in this team. And the reason why Calafiori is moving the needle is because he is a player that definitely, from what I have seen and what I've now watched and researched, trust me, being on holiday, I've been able to sit back and watch a lot more of the guy, is that level of potential and quality means that we may have an established left-sided player there. And don't forget Jurriën Timber either. Jurriën Timber, of course, is a player that we signed last summer, barely played and looked very good on both sides of the fullback positions. So I think we can and are moving the needle. Then if you look at some of the other players that we've been linked to, the right-sided players, Nico Williams, we've mentioned Leroy Sané as a potential option, although he did get an injury recently, which does worry me, and that could change things as a potential option to sign maybe this window. Who knows? We'll wait and see. Eberechi Eze, I think Eze is better than Smith Rowe. Eze is better than Vieira. So you're pushing the needle in terms of competition for Odegaard's role, potentially for the left 8 role as well. We need to look at bringing in a midfielder as well, of course, that can play more minutes than Partey and potentially has a higher ceiling than Partey already is at right now. All of those things are pushing needles. All of those deals that we need to do are trying to close the gap. And as I've mentioned time and time again, raising the ceiling in this window is going to be incredibly tough. And that's a credit to our squad and also an indication of where the market's at. But what we can do is we can raise the floor. And if we raise the floor of this squad, we will get into a much better position to close what has become now a 2-point gap to Manchester City at the top of the table. So that's what's really important about Arsenal's transfer window. So please make sure but please try and understand that is kind of the level that where we're at in terms of both of those points. And that is ultimately what is key. Alvamod says the needle is moving. It's just not spiking and reaching a maximum. That is, as Tom says, not possible. Important is to keep the needle where it is and keep it pushing. When you try and push it, it is moving, especially with signs like Calafiori. That's really important. Laura says, what does it mean when a player agrees personal terms? I mean, have you not heard that we've agreed personal terms? I thought it was obvious at this point in time. Seriousness of the question, which I think it was in satire, Laura. For those that aren't aware, personal terms are very easy to agree, especially unofficially. Often what teams do is reach out unofficially and just kind of put the feelers out, get a vibe for how players are feeling about the potential move to Arsenal. They might make a verbal offer, which is not an official offer to a player, of what they could expect to earn. The report suggests €4 million per season. And so, of course, if Calafiori, as an example, does agree those personal terms, it means what he's agreeing to is the move, for starters. He's agreed that he would move to Arsenal, were Arsenal to agree a fee deal with Bologna. They're agreeing to the wages, of course, that Arsenal will be playing and the structure of those wages and how they would be played. And, of course, they're agreeing to their position in the squad. A lot of discussions that go on in negotiations, not just wages and, the club you're signing for and how much you're going to get, but it's also your place in the squads. It's where the manager sees you being used. And so when personal terms are agreed, it's to do with wages, it's to do with the position in the squad. And that's what's really important. John says, you're presuming other teams won't progress ahead of you. John, at the moment, I'm not presuming that at all. Or assuming that. Arsenal are categorically the second best team in this country. And that is evidenced by the position that they finished last season. We haven't got any evidence right now, John, to suggest any other team will move above Arsenal in the table until next season starts. So the only presumptions that can be done is from other teams. Arsenal aren't doing any presumptions right now because Arsenal are the second best side in the country. And that is evidenced, of course, by where they finished in the league last season after 38 games. So Liverpool, for instance, who were currently third in the league and finished third in the table, are the third best team in the league, despite the fact that they picked up a League Cup. And Manchester United remain the eighth best team in the league, despite the fact that they picked up an FA Cup. Would I have swapped my season for Liverpool's or, of course, for Manchester United? No, I personally wouldn't, because I think it was more important to have the season that we had and finish where we did, and to get us into a position where we're going to be better and more competitive next season. Nor will I swap squads with either of those two teams either, not at all. Arsenal are far better position than both of those teams to compete with Manchester City next season, and it is going to be on Arsenal to try and do that. So let's make sure that we do that. The only presumptions that can be made, John, are from other teams. Arsenal, other than Manchester City, are the team that make the least presumptions. You would have to do a lot of presumptions to be any other side, presuming that you're going to do better than Arsenal next season. I'm getting the sense, John, that you may not be an Arsenal fan, but please do let me know what you think. And who you do support, I would be very keen to know, because I'm getting the feeling that you may not be an Arsenal fan. P Sharp says all over the UK, Mexico, Australia, NZ, Kenya, South Africa, and more are watching a bloke who's camping and talking in a car. I'm not even in a car park. I'm in a campsite. I actually have to drive the car from our little glamping pod into the middle of the field, because the Wi-Fi where our pod is isn't strong enough to do the show. So at the moment, I'm just a car in the middle of a field where the Wi-Fi is ultimately best, P. So that's the level. And there's at the moment over 1,000 of you on YouTube watching this show, which, considering, as I say, I'm on holiday sitting in a car doing this show, 1,000 of you just watching me sit here it's great, and I love it. And thank you for the kind support that you continue to bring and show to the channel. It means the absolute world. So thank you for that. I think we will end the show there. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Thank you for helping us break into the top 150 podcasts for sport in Britain. That's amazing. So thank you for that. And I will see you tomorrow morning for more updates. And we'll be talking a little bit, of course, about William Saliba maybe making the final of the Euros, if indeed they're successful against Spain. Although my bet would be Spain. Based upon the performances of both of those two nations during this tournament, my favourite would be slightly towards Spain. But France are my sweepstake. It would be great to have a France-England final, because it's a win-win for me. So either I'm getting a bit of money, or, of course, I'm going to see successfully England win a Euros, which would also be great, despite and in spite of their manager. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. I appreciate your time, as always. Have a fantastic day. Enjoy yourselves. Stay safe. Stay well. Stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.